Picture this: a lone rider galloping through the dead of night, his cloak whipped by the wind as he clutches a sealed message close to his chest. Behind him, the glow of burning villages flickers on the horizon. Ahead, nothing but shadows and the ever-present threat of enemy patrols. This wasn't just a scene from a thrilling tale. It was real life for the medieval couriers who formed a secret web of communication across war-torn Europe and beyond. These men were the lifelines of kingdoms, the invisible threads holding empires together when borders shifted like sand and trust was as fragile as parchment. Without them, history as we know it might have unraveled entirely. What's even more astonishing, this wasn't just about speed or bravery, it was about cunning. These couriers weren't mere messengers, they were masters of disguise, code, and deception. They memorized intricate routes known only to a select few, carried letters written in invisible ink, and sometimes even swallowed their dispatches to keep them safe from prying eyes. Their work was so vital that entire battles, sometimes even wars, hinged on whether a single scrap of parchment reached its destination in time. And yet, their names are lost to history, their stories buried under layers of dust and time. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on this shadowy world. You'll discover how these unsung heroes operated in plain sight, yet left almost no trace, how they outsmarted spies and soldiers alike, and how their legacy lives on in the way we communicate even today. This isn't just a story about the past, it's about the hidden foundations of the modern world, built by ordinary people who did extraordinary things under the cover of darkness. So settle in, because what you're about to learn will change the way you see history and the quiet, relentless courage it took to shape it. Long before the age of instant communication, when a single letter could take weeks or even months to reach its destination, medieval societies had to get creative. The roots of these courier networks stretch back to the collapse of the Roman Empire, when the once unified roads and postal systems crumbled into disrepair. Without a centralized authority to maintain them, kingdoms and city-states were left to patch together their own solutions. Enter the monasteries, quiet hubs of learning that doubled as way stations for travelers and messengers. Monks, already accustomed to meticulous record-keeping, became early archivists of correspondence, safeguarding letters between distant bishops and nobles. But it wasn't just the religious who saw the value in swift communication. Merchant guilds, with their far-flung trade routes, needed reliable ways to send contracts, price updates, and warnings of bandit activity. A delayed message could mean the difference between a fortune made and a caravan lost. These merchants often employed their own private couriers, men who knew the backroads and river crossings better than anyone. Over time, these informal networks grew into something more organized, especially in places like the Byzantine Empire, where the emperor's word had to reach the edges of his realm without delay. The Byzantines perfected their system with military precision. Their imperial cursors were handpicked for endurance and loyalty, capable of covering staggering distances in record time. Some accounts suggest these messengers could travel up to 100 miles in a single day, switching horses at relay stations built along major roads. And here's the twist: they didn't just carry scrolls. Often, the most sensitive messages were delivered verbally, memorized word for word to avoid interception. Imagine the pressure of holding an empire's secrets in your mind, knowing a single slip could change the course of a war. What's fascinating is how these early systems set the blueprint for centuries to come. The Mongol Empire later borrowed and expanded these ideas, creating the famed Yam network with its horse relays and encrypted passes. even the Vatican developed its own papal couriers, who carried everything from pardons to declarations of excommunication. These weren't just men on horseback, they were the first links in a chain that would eventually stretch across continents, proving that no matter the era, those who controlled the flow of information held the real power. While kings and merchants built their own courier networks, there was another group quietly shaping the flow of information across medieval Europe, men who had sworn vows of silence. Monasteries became the unlikely nerve centers of communication, their scriptoriums buzzing with activity as monks painstakingly copied not just religious texts, but everything from medical treatises to royal decrees. These cloistered scholars didn't just preserve knowledge, they became its guardians, often transporting delicate parchments between abbeys under the guise of pilgrimage. Take the Benedictines, whose rule demanded strict obedience but also practical cooperation between monasteries. A letter from the abbot of Monte Cassino in Italy might travel north to Cluny in France, carried by a monk whose robes concealed more than just his identity. They offered safe passage through warring territories. No feudal lord would dare intercept a messenger of God, not when divine retribution was considered far worse than any earthly consequence. And because these monks were literate in an age when most were not, they could verify the authenticity of documents, adding another layer of security. But here's what's truly remarkable. Monasteries didn't just relay messages, they encrypted them. Some abbots developed elaborate ciphers, substituting letters with symbols only fellow clerics could decipher. The famous Voynich manuscript, with its baffling botanical illustrations and unreadable script, might well have been the work of such monastic cryptographers. Even the physical layout of abbeys played a role. Hidden alcoves and double-walled libraries safeguarded sensitive correspondence, while garden labyrinths provided discreet meeting spots for messengers. This system had an unintended consequence. As monastic networks grew, so did their influence over secular affairs. A bishop's letter endorsing a king's claim to the throne could change the fate of nations, and monks often found themselves as de facto diplomats. The Cistercians, with their sprawling network of nearly 700 abbeys, became so adept at moving information that secular rulers began borrowing their infrastructure. It was a quiet revolution, one that proved faith and knowledge weren't just companions, but co-conspirators in shaping the medieval world. And let's not forget the human cost. These monk couriers faced blizzards, bandits, and the constant threat of deadly illness, all for the sake of a single parchment. Their legacy lives on in the unbroken chain of scholarship they maintained, ensuring that even in the darkest corners of the Middle Ages, the light of knowledge never fully went out. Merchant caravans winding through mountain passes carried more than silks and spices. They were mobile vaults of secrets. Their cargo holds hiding messages that could make or break alliances. While kings relied on royal couriers and monks moved sacred texts, it was the merchants who mastered the art of blending in, turning every trade route into an information highway. Their credibility came from necessity. No lord would disrupt a merchant's journey without risking his own supply chain, making these travelers the perfect conduits for sensitive dispatches. A wool trader from Flanders might casually hand off a sealed letter to a Venetian glass merchant over a shared meal, the exchange invisible to prying eyes. The Hanseatic League, that powerhouse of medieval commerce, took this system to new heights. Their network stretched from London to Novgorod, with each guild hall acting as a clearinghouse for both goods and intelligence. A merchant leaving Bruges with a shipment of Flemish cloth might also carry encrypted updates on English tariffs, hidden in the hollowed-out handle of a trade ledger. Some guilds even developed their own cipher systems, using wool sample cards or wine barrels as codebooks. Only those familiar with the trade's nuances could decipher the real message beneath mundane business notations. But the real genius lay in compartmentalization. Rarely did a single merchant carry a document from start to finish. Instead, letters hopped from one trusted trader to another like stepping stones across a river. A Genos ship captain might deliver a packet to a Barcelona spice dealer, who'd then pass it to a land-bound muleteer heading inland. This relay method ensured no single courier knew the full contents or final destination, protecting the information if any link in the chain was compromised. The most daring merchants turned their entire cargo into camouflage. Accounts survive of hollowed-out wax seals containing microscripts, or bolts of fabric woven with coded patterns visible only under certain dyes. One Venetian merchant famously transported an entire peace treaty inside a shipment of pickled herring barrels, the brine-proof parchment rolled inside a sheep's bladder. These weren't just delivermen, they were early cryptographers, proving that commerce and covert operations have always been intertwined. Perhaps their greatest legacy was normalizing the impossible. By making long-distance communication routine, merchant couriers laid the groundwork for modern banking, diplomacy, and even postal services. The Medici family's famed banking empire relied on their private courier network to transfer credit letters faster than competitors, while the Fuggers of Augsburg used theirs to corner the European news market. In an era where information was power, these unassuming traders became the silent architects of globalization, stitching continents together one discrete message at a time. Royal messengers weren't just employees, they were extensions of a king's will, human vessels carrying the words that could spark rebellions or secure peace. Take the case of England's king's messengers, an elite corps established under Edward I in the late 13th century. These men weren't chosen for their speed alone. They were selected for unshakable loyalty, often rising from the ranks of trusted household knights or clerks. Their badge of office, a silver greyhound pendant, wasn't just decoration. It was a legal shield, granting them immunity from arrest or detention while on duty. Even in the midst of feuding noble factions, that greyhound guaranteed safe passage, a tangible reminder that interfering with a royal courier was tantamount to striking the king himself. But protection alone didn't ensure success. These messengers operated in a world where every forest road held potential ambushes, and every castle gate might conceal a spy. Some carried multiple copies of critical dispatches, sending them by separate routes to guarantee at least one would arrive. Others employed psychological tactics, like the French royal couriers who traveled with a blank, wax-sealed scroll visibly tucked into their belts. The mere suggestion that they carried the king's personal orders often deterred would-be interceptors, and when subtlety failed, there was always the weight of royal wrath. Records from the reign of Philip the Fair of France show a nobleman's hands were severed for merely delaying a messenger's horse. The most sensitive missions required more than bravery, they demanded acting skills. Disguises were common. A messenger might pose as a pilgrim, a minstrel, or even a leper to avoid detection. One infamous case involved an English courier during the 100 Years' War who smuggled battle plans out of Calais inside a loaf of bread, playing the part of a half-starved beggar at enemy checkpoints. Others relied on misdirection, like the Spanish envoy who sewed a coded letter into the lining of his saddle, then made a show of guarding an ornate but empty lockbox to draw attention away from the real prize. What's often overlooked is how these messengers shaped diplomacy itself. The speed and reliability of royal courier networks allowed rulers to negotiate in real time across vast distances. When Richard the Lionheart was captured returning from the Crusades, It was his messengers who shuttled between Austria, Germany, and England to arrange his staggering ransom equivalent to 3 years of the kingdom's entire income. Their ability to move faster than gossip or rebellion quite literally kept crowns on heads, yet for all their privileges, these men walked a razor's edge. A messenger delivering bad news like a defeat in battle might find himself the target of a monarch's fury. Some were imprisoned or worse for simply being the bearer of unwelcome truths. Others faced temptation in the form of bribes. The archives of Venice's Council of 10 detail cases where rival city-states offered messengers fortunes to lose critical dispatches. That's why the most trusted couriers often had their families housed within palace walls, both as an honor and as collateral for their loyalty. Their legacy lingers in phrases we still use today. "Don't shoot the messenger" wasn't just a saying, it was a brutal reality these men lived by. And while their greyhound badges and cipher techniques have faded into history, their influence hasn't. Modern diplomatic immunity, encrypted communications, even the concept of priority mail, all trace their roots back to these medieval operatives who proved time and again that in the Game of Thrones, information wasn't just power, it was survival. Becoming a medieval courier wasn't just about having a fast horse, it was a brutal apprenticeship that tested mind and body alike. Imagine a young recruit's first lesson, standing knee-deep in an icy river at dawn, reciting a 20-line message verbatim while his instructor hurled distractions, shouted insults, clanging swords, even buckets of offal, to simulate the chaos of a battlefield. Only those who could repeat every word flawlessly earned the right to advance. This was survival training for the mind, because in a world where written messages could be intercepted, couriers often served as living, breathing parchment. The Byzantine Empire took this to extremes, with messengers required to memorize entire speeches in foreign languages they didn't understand, reducing them to human recording devices immune to torture or bribery. Physical conditioning was equally unforgiving. Couriers trained like Olympic athletes, running up mountain paths with weighted sacks to build endurance, or spending nights outdoors in all weather to harden themselves against the elements. Mongol messengers could reportedly sleep in the saddle while their horses galloped onward, their bodies conditioned to function on scraps of rest. European couriers practiced vaulting onto moving horses, a critical skill when fleeing ambushes, while others learned to swim rivers fully armored because a soaked cloak was preferable to a lost dispatch. But raw stamina meant nothing without guile. Trainees studied the art of misdirection, learning to sew hollow compartments into their clothing or craft false-bottomed waterskins. Some mastered shadow routes, alternate paths known only to their guild, like the smugglers' trails through the Alps that bypassed toll stations. Others became amateur cryptographers, using cipher wheels to encode messages with symbols only their counterparts could decipher. The most skilled could spot a safe house by subtle marks, a certain arrangement of hay bales in a barn, or a tavern sign painted with an extra stripe indicating where allies awaited. Perhaps the most surprising skill was linguistic flexibility. A courier might start his journey speaking French at a royal court, switch to German at a border town, and barter for supplies in broken Hungarian by afternoon. A papal courier even maintained a roster of polyglot messengers who could navigate everything from Celtic dialects to Arabic trade jargon. This wasn't just about communication, it was camouflage. A courier pretending to be a Flemish wool trader had to know enough about textile grades to fool actual merchants, while those posing as pilgrims mastered regional Saint lore to blend into the crowds heading to Santiago or Rome. The final test was often a solo journey through hostile territory with a dummy message planted on the trainee. Those who arrived at their destination without the sealed parchment, proving they'd hidden or destroyed it before capture passed. Those who didn't well, the scars made for memorable lessons. This relentless training transformed ordinary men into near mythical figures, capable of crossing war zones with nothing but their wits and the clothes on their back. Their real weapon wasn't speed, it was the ability to make whole armies and kingdoms disappear with a change of cloak and a convincing lie. Crossing a medieval battlefield was dangerous enough, but for couriers, the real threats lurked in the quiet moments. That rustle in the bushes wasn't just the wind, it could be bandits counting your saddlebags. The friendly innkeeper offering ale might be sliding a knife toward your ribs while you drank. Every decision carried life or death stakes. Take the case of a Swiss courier in 1479, who survived an ambush by strapping his dispatches to a stray dog, sending the animal racing into the woods while he led pursuers in the opposite direction. The dog reached Bern 3 days later, its collar still holding the intact message. Weather was just as merciless as human enemies. A snowstorm in the Alps could bury a rider and his mount in minutes, while summer droughts turned Balkan riverbeds into sand traps. Some couriers sewed goose fat into their boots to stave off frostbite, or carried vinegar-soaked rags to mask their scent from wolves. The smartest traveled with weather witches, local guides who could read cloud patterns and bird behavior to predict storms. But even they couldn't always outrun disaster. Records from the Hanseatic League tell of a messenger frozen so solid in a blizzard that his dispatches had to be chiseled from his ice-encrusted satchel. Then there were the silent killers, betrayal and deception. A Venetian spy's memoir describes how he identified enemy couriers by their riding posture. Men accustomed to long distances had a distinctive slump. Once marked, they'd be followed to isolated stretches of road. Some messengers carried trap letters, fake documents filled with misleading troop movements or fake treaties, designed to send interceptors chasing phantoms. Others, like the papal nuncios, wore hollow crucifixes containing vials of quick-acting poisons. Better to die than reveal the location of a hidden cardinal or the contents of a secret council. Mountains provided both peril and protection. The Pyrenees passes hid countless skeletons of couriers who misjudged the paths, yet their sheer cliffs also offered escape routes. One Basque messenger famously survived by sliding down a shale slope on his shield, a trick he'd learned from local shepherds. Rivers posed different challenges. Crossing meant exposing yourself on open water, but swimming meant ruining your dispatches. The solution, inflated animal bladders, served as makeshift rafts, while wax-sealed documents went into lead tubes that doubled as sinking weights if pursuers got too close. What's chilling is how ordinary these dangers became. Couriers developed an almost supernatural awareness, the way a crow's sudden silence might signal an archer in the trees, or how a too-quiet village square hinted at an impending raid. Their journals read like survival manuals, which mushrooms could stave off hunger, which roadside shrines had priest holes for hiding, even how to fake your own death using pig's blood and a convincing groan. These weren't just deliverymen, they were medieval special operatives, turning every rock and rain puddle into potential tools or traps. The miracle isn't that so many messages were lost, it's that any arrived at all. When a single parchment could alter the fate of nations, every successful delivery was a small defiance against chaos. These couriers didn't just brave danger, they outthought it, proving that the sharpest weapon wasn't a sword or a shield, but a mind trained to see possibility where others saw only peril. The art of secret writing wasn't invented in smoky spy dens or high-tech labs. It was perfected by medieval couriers who turned everyday objects into tools of deception. Take the humble lemon, a fruit you'd find in any market square. When its juice dried on parchment, the words vanished until held near a candle flame where they'd reappear like ghosts. This wasn't just kitchen chemistry, it was a lifeline for messengers carrying treasonous plots or battlefield strategies. But the real masters didn't stop there. They'd write between the lines of an innocent shopping list, their hidden message only visible when the parchment was tilted toward light at just the right angle. Some codes were so elaborate they'd baffle modern cryptographers. The Cardan Grill, named after 16th century scholar Girolamo Cardano but used centuries earlier, involved a paper stencil with random cutouts. When placed over a seemingly nonsensical letter, the holes revealed the true message like a linguistic jigsaw puzzle. Others relied on number substitutions tied to biblical verses. A courier might receive a letter full of pious quotes, but only he knew that the third word of each line corresponded to coordinates on a prearranged map. The Byzantines took it further, developing cipher disks that could scramble entire alphabets with a twist of the wrist. Wax seals became miniature fortresses of authentication. Clever couriers embedded threads of colored silk or specific patterns only visible under magnification. One surviving letter from the Duke of Burgundy's archives shows a seal that appears plain until tilted. Hidden within the wax is a tiny imprint of a boar's tusk, the Duke's personal anti-forgery mark. Others used split seals, where half the design was held by the sender and half by the recipient, like a medieval version of two-factor authentication. Then there were the hiding places that bordered on artistry. A pilgrim's staff might unscrew to reveal a hollow compartment, while book covers could conceal thin vellum sheets between layers of wood and leather. The most daring trick, bullet letters, tightly rolled dispatches small enough to fit inside musket barrels, carried openly by soldiers who didn't realize they were mules for someone else's secrets. What's startling is how these methods mirror modern cybersecurity principles. The Tyrrhenian Notes monks used a shorthand system of thousands of symbols functioned like medieval encryption algorithms, compressing entire paragraphs into squiggles only trained eyes could read. And that lemon juice firewall had its own vulnerabilities. Savvy interceptors learned to steam suspicious letters over pots of boiling water. The arms race between codemakers and codebreakers wasn't born in the digital age, it was alive and well when castles still dotted the landscape. Perhaps the most poignant examples are the burn after reading messages of their time. Some Venetian couriers carried letters written on salt-infused parchment that would dissolve if soaked in water, perfect for tossing into a moat if captured. Others used charcoal ink that faded within days, ensuring timely delivery or permanent silence. These weren't just tricks, they were acts of faith in the fragile power of words and the ordinary people who risked everything to keep them moving. History often remembers the rulers and warriors, but rarely the messengers who carried the words that shaped their victories. Consider Marco Polo's uncle, Maffei Polo, a merchant-turned-diplomat who didn't just trade silks and spices but secrets. When the Polo brothers returned from their first journey to the Mongol Empire, they didn't just bring exotic goods, they carried a letter from Kublai Khan himself, addressed to the Pope. Written in delicate script on a sheet of hammered silver, the message proposed an alliance between East and West, carried across continents by men who knew one misstep could spark a diplomatic firestorm. That single delivery set the stage for Marco's legendary travels, proving couriers weren't just conduits, they were catalysts. Then there's the shadowy figure known only as the Runner of Kosovo. In 1389, as the Ottoman army massed near the Balkans, this unnamed messenger raced through hostile territory with his warning stitched into the lining of his boot. By the time he collapsed at Prince Lazar's court, his feet were bloodied ruins, but his message arrived intact, giving Serbia precious days to prepare for the fateful battle that would echo through centuries. No one recorded his name, but without him, the Christian coalition might never have formed at all. Joan of Arc understood the power of a well-timed letter better than most. Her legendary Letter to the English, dictated in 1429 and carried by riders she personally vetted, wasn't just propaganda, it was psychological warfare. Addressed directly to Henry VI's commanders, her words threatened divine retribution if they didn't abandon France. But here's the twist: she had multiple copies dispatched along different routes, ensuring the English would intercept at least one. The resulting panic among their ranks proved that parchment could be as deadly as any sword. Even royalty got their hands dirty when it came to sensitive deliveries. Isabella of Castile, the queen who funded Columbus' voyages, once disguised her own confessor as a wool merchant to smuggle encrypted war plans into Granada during the Reconquista. The priest's robes hid compartments filled with tiny scrolls written in a cipher based on liturgical chants, a code only her generals could decipher. It was a gamble that paid off. Those messages coordinated the final siege that toppled the last Muslim stronghold in Spain. The most astonishing part: these weren't exceptions, they were the rule. For every famous courier we know about, 100 more operated in total obscurity. Like the Bavarian rider who swam the Danube at night with treaty terms sealed in a wax ball clenched between his teeth, or the Florentine girl who carried Republican manifestos hidden in her braided hair during the Pazzi conspiracy. Their anonymity was their strength. The less remarkable they seemed, the more dangerous their cargo could be. What binds these stories together isn't just bravery, it's the quiet understanding that history isn't shaped by grand gestures alone, but by countless unheralded acts of precision and grit. These couriers didn't just deliver messages, they bent the arc of events, proving that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one holding the letter, not the one who signed it. Their legacy lingers in the unbroken chain of trust that still underpins everything from modern diplomacy to your morning mail, reminding us that even in an age of instant communication, there's still something extraordinary about the human hands that make words move. While castles and battlefields dominate most medieval tales, some of history's most daring couriers wore dresses, not armor. Take Elena of Aquitaine, queen of both France and England at different points, who turned her court into a hub of covert communication. During her sons' rebellion against their father, Henry II, she didn't just send messages, she weaponized gossip. A carefully signed complaint about the king's temper to her ladies-in-waiting might reach rebel ears by sundown, while a strategically dropped handkerchief at a feast could signal allied barons to mobilize. Noblewomen like her exploited something kings couldn't buy: invisibility. While male messengers drew suspicion, no one batted an eye at a duchess exchanging embroidery patterns with a neighboring court, even if those silken threads concealed tiny scrolls detailing troop movements. Convents became another unexpected hotbed of clandestine delivery. Abbesses like Hildegard of Bingen operated scriptoriums where nuns copied not just psalms, but political correspondence. Their piety was the perfect cover. Intercepted letters between monasteries were assumed to be spiritual guidance, not updates on excommunication threats or papal elections. Some orders even developed their own version of airmail, carrier pigeons smuggled in hollowed-out reliquaries, their tiny message tubes disguised as saintly artifacts. And because convents often educated noble daughters, these women had lifelong connections across kingdoms, turning abbeys into switchboards for Europe's elite. Peasant women played an equally vital, if quieter, role. A milkmaid singing as she walked to market might be memorizing the lyrics to pass along a warning about tax collectors. Midwives who moved freely between households could relay secrets under the guise of checking on a pregnancy. Even laundry became a tool. Specific patterns of hung linens might signal safe houses to fleeing messengers. In one documented case from 14th century Florence, a weaver's wife transmitted battle plans by coding them into the warp and weft of a tapestry commissioned by the enemy commander himself. The ultimate irony, he hung it in his war room, never realizing the decorative vines spelled out his own troop locations. What made women so effective wasn't just their ability to evade notice, it was how they weaponized societal assumptions. Men expected women to be chatterboxes, so no one questioned a countess hosting endless sewing circles where gossip actually coordinated supply lines. The church's insistence on female modesty meant nuns could travel with sealed carriages no soldier would dare search, and in an era when peasant women were considered part of the landscape, like trees or sheep, their constant movement drew no scrutiny. Their legacy lingers in phrases we still use today. Spinning a tale comes from the literal act of hiding messages in distaff wool, while sewing circles carried echoes of those covert medieval meetings. These women didn't just deliver messages, they rewrote the rules of engagement, proving that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a sword or a cipher, it's being seen as harmless. The Mongol Empire's YAM stations were the medieval equivalent of a high-speed internet backbone, just with more horse sweat and fewer cables. Picture a chain of way stations stretching from the Danube to the Pacific, each stocked with fresh mounts, food, and even spare couriers waiting like living batteries ready to be swapped into service. A message could gallop from Budapest to Beijing in under 2 weeks, a distance that would take an ordinary traveler months. The secret wasn't just speed, it was ruthless efficiency. Every YAM outpost was positioned exactly 20 miles apart, the maximum distance a horse could sprint before exhaustion. Couriers carried Pesa metal passports hung around their necks that demanded absolute priority. Woe to any local official who failed to provide a fresh horse. Genghis Khan's decrees promised execution for delays, but the real stroke of genius was how the system blurred the line between infrastructure and intelligence. YAM stations didn't just relay messages, they gathered them. Station masters recorded everything from weather patterns to rebel movements, creating an early version of real-time data tracking. When a courier arrived with news of a distant uprising, he might find a replacement rider already briefed and waiting, the system anticipating needs before they were spoken. Some historians argue the YAM network was the first true information superhighway, its riders functioning like medieval packets of data hopping between nodes. Christian Europe had its own version, though with less imperial coordination. Along the Camino de Santiago, innkeepers kept stables of post horses for hire, but savvy couriers knew which ones were secretly reserved for urgent dispatches. A pilgrim might share a meal with a man he assumed was just another traveler, never realizing his dining companion was swapping sealed letters with the inn's baker between courses. These unofficial relay points became so reliable that by the 14th century, merchants could calculate delivery times to within 3 days. Medieval FedEx with more ale and fewer tracking numbers. What's startling is how these systems foreshadowed modern logistics. The Mongols' use of standardized mounts, all YAM horses were geldings of similar size and stamina mirrors today's interchangeable shipping containers. Their relay method, where no single rider completed the full journey, resembles how modern data packets bounce between servers. Even the Pesa system finds its echo in diplomatic pouches and priority mail stickers. The difference, while we worry about bandwidth, they worried about bandits, but the core idea remains identical. Speed wins wars, secures fortunes, and shapes history. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in the failures. When the Black Death wiped out half of Europe's population, the courier networks collapsed not from lack of horses, but from too many dead station keepers. It was a grim reminder that even the most brilliant system relies on human links. Yet for a few centuries, these riders proved that distance wasn't an absolute. It was just a problem waiting for the right combination of hoofbeats and ingenuity to solve. The year 1348 changed everything for Europe's couriers. As the Black Death crept from port cities into the countryside, these messengers found themselves racing not just against time, but against an invisible enemy that respected neither rank nor borders. Towns sealed their gates with barricades of overturned carts, yet still the couriers came, some lowering letters by rope into walled cities, others shouting news across moats from what they hoped was a safe distance. In Marseille, a single surviving ledger records how one rider delivered 37 quarantine notices in a single week, each stamped with the city crest and sealed with wax mixed with garlic, a primitive attempt at disinfection. The most haunting accounts come from Italy, where the Venetian Republic pioneered Europe's first organized plague response. Their couriers wore bizarre leather masks with long, bird-like beaks stuffed with aromatic herbs, believing the miasma of disease could be filtered through lavender and mint. These grim figures became known as doctor messengers, carrying both death warrants, lists of households to be boarded up, and fragile hopes in the form of medical advice transcribed from Arab physicians. One such scroll, now preserved in Bologna's university library, instructed survivors to burn juniper berries in their hearths and avoid sleeping facing north. Superstition and science tangled together in desperation. But not all messages were official. In the German states, desperate families pinned letters to trees along known courier routes, hoping some kind-hearted rider would carry their pleas for medicine or priests to the next town. The stone post system emerged, designated rocks where couriers would leave dispatches untouched for days, allowing potential contagion to fade before collection. Some messengers took extraordinary precautions. Records from Avignon describe a papal courier who transported letters between tongs, dunking each parchment in vinegar before reading. The psychological toll was unimaginable. These men and women knew each delivery might be their last, not from bandits or storms, but from a fever that could strike mid-journey. In London, the Guild of Messengers kept a grim ledger tracking which members had gone quiet, their routes reassigned before their bodies were cold. Yet still they rode, because the alternative was unthinkable. When the Duke of Normandy begged Paris for physicians, it was a 15-year-old messenger girl who swam the infected Seine with the response tied in her hair. When the King of Aragon needed to warn his cousin about tainted well water, the courier memorized the message, then burned the original rather than risk spreading poisoned parchment. What's rarely acknowledged is how these crisis adaptations reshaped communication forever. The Venetian system of 40-day quarantines, 40 giorni, gave us the modern concept of isolation. The practice of airing out letters led to standardized postal fumigation that continued into the 19th century. And that teenage swimmer, her bravery inspired the first organized corps of emergency messengers, precursors to today's disaster response teams. In the end, the plague years proved a terrible paradox. The very people suspected of spreading death became the only lifeline against it, their courage rewriting the rules of survival in an age when information wasn't just power, it was the thin line between despair and hope. The clatter of the printing press didn't just revolutionize books, it sounded the death knell for an entire way of moving information. By the mid-15th century, what had once required a fleet of couriers could suddenly be replicated by a single press operator in Mainz. News broadsheets and mass-produced pamphlets flooded Europe, making some messenger networks seem as outdated as carrier pigeons in the age of telegrams. But here's what most history books miss. The printing press didn't kill the courier profession, it forced it to adapt. Those same presses created a hunger for timely updates. spawning a new breed of newsletter runners who raced between cities with the latest printed reports before the ink was dry. Road improvements accelerated the shift. Where medieval couriers had picked their way through muddy tracks, 16th-century messengers found themselves riding on the first paved highways since Roman times. The French Poste Royale, established in 1477, marked a turning point, a government-run relay system with standardized rates and scheduled departures. Suddenly, a merchant in Lyon could send a letter to Paris with reasonable certainty it would arrive within 3 days, but this efficiency came at a cost. The romantic figure of the lone, resourceful courier began fading into a faceless bureaucracy of postmen and toll collectors, yet the old skills didn't disappear, they went underground. Renaissance spy masters like Elizabethan England's Francis Walsingham paid top coin for messengers schooled in medieval tradecraft. These operatives still used lemon juice invisible ink and hollow book hiding places, but now they worked for centralized intelligence networks rather than feudal lords. The Vatican's infamous Black Chamber employed ex-couriers to steam open and reseal diplomatic correspondence, while the Spanish crown's messengers doubled as cryptographers, using cipher techniques refined over centuries. Even standing armies with their newfangled signal flags and drum codes couldn't entirely replace human couriers. During the 30 Years' War, battlefield dispatches still relied on riders who knew how to slip past enemy lines, men like the Swedish Snäfhunner, guerrilla couriers who could navigate by starlight and forge river crossings without bridges. Their knowledge of terrain and local dialects made them indispensable, proving that technology couldn't always outperform centuries of hard-won experience. The final holdouts were the royal messengers. In Versailles, Louis XIV maintained a corps of huissiers, who combined the ceremonial pomp of the Sun King's court with very real espionage duties. Their silver-tipped wands of office concealed compartments for sensitive documents, while their lavish uniforms discouraged suspicious searches. Across the Channel, England's king's messengers clung to their greyhound badges until the 1700s, though by then their role had dwindled to delivering ceremonial invitations rather than life or death dispatches. What's extraordinary is how thoroughly medieval courier techniques permeated modern systems. The British Admiralty's 19th-century semaphore towers operated on the same relay principle as Mongol yam stations. Early postal services adopted the merchant guild's practice of waybills and receipts. Even today's intelligence agencies still train operatives in dead drops and brush passes, direct descendants of those clandestine medieval exchanges. The last professional couriers might have hung up their cloaks 2 centuries ago, but their legacy gallops on in every encrypted email and tracked package, proving that while technologies change, the human instinct to move information quickly, secretly, reliably remains timeless. The next time you hit send on an email or tap out a text, consider this: your message is racing across the globe at near light speed, yet it faces risks startlingly similar to those of a medieval courier dodging bandits in a mountain pass. Our digital age may have replaced parchment with pixels, but the core challenges of communication remain unchanged. How to move information swiftly, keep it secure, and ensure it reaches the right hands intact. Those medieval messengers with their wax seals and memorized dispatches were grappling with the same fundamental issues we face today in cybersecurity, proving that while our tools have evolved, human ingenuity follows timeless patterns. Take the concept of redundancy, for instance. When a 14th-century Venetian merchant sent 3 identical letters by different ships, he wasn't just being cautious, he was applying the same principle modern IT teams use when backing up data across multiple servers. Both systems recognize a hard truth: information is fragile, whether it's ink on vellum or code in the cloud. The Mongols took this further with their relay stations, ensuring no single rider bore full responsibility for a message delivery, a medieval precursor to today's distributed networks, where data hops between nodes to avoid bottlenecks. Even the burn-after-reading tactics of dissolving parchment find their echo in self-destructing encrypted chats, but the most striking parallel lies in the human factor. No firewall or algorithm can replicate the judgment of a seasoned courier deciding whether to trust a seemingly friendly innkeeper, just as no spam filter can fully replace a wary eye spotting a phishing email's subtle red flags. Medieval messengers relied on nuanced skills we still value today, reading body language, adapting to unexpected roadblocks, and knowing when to destroy sensitive information rather than let it fall into enemy hands. Modern cybersecurity drills teach employees these same situational awareness techniques, proving that technology alone can't outthink human cunning. Perhaps the greatest lesson is in the economics of trust. A king's messenger's silver greyhound badge functioned much like today's SSL certificates, a visible symbol authenticating the carrier's legitimacy. Both systems collapse if trust is abused, whether by a bribed courier or a hacked digital signature. This explains why, despite living in an era of biometric scans and blockchain, we still fall back on medieval solutions like two-factor authentication, the digital equivalent of requiring both a wax seal and a verbal password from the sender. What's humbling is realizing how little separates a Mongol rider's cipher wheel from a modern encryption key, or a monk's hidden compartment from a steganography app that hides files in cat memes. The stakes haven't changed either then as now. A single intercepted message could bankrupt a merchant or topple a government. The difference: medieval couriers understood their vulnerability in a way we've forgotten. They knew every letter might be their last, so they baked resilience into the system itself: multiple routes, fallback plans, and the wisdom to sometimes leave no record at all. In an age where we thoughtlessly blast sensitive data into the digital void, these riders from the past whisper a warning. Speed means nothing without security, and convenience is worthless if it erodes caution. Their legacy isn't just in the letters they delivered, but in the hard-won truths they lived by: that information is power, yes, but only if you can protect it long enough to let it matter. Literature never quite lets the courier fade into history. Instead, it immortalizes them in cloaks of legend. Tolkien's Riders of Rohan didn't just gallop across Middle-earth. They carried the weight of entire battles in their saddlebags, their horns sounding like hope itself. George R.R. Martin's ravens, dark-feathered and relentless, became winged shadows of urgency in Game of Thrones, proving that even fantasy kingdoms rise or fall on the speed of a message. These aren't just plot devices, they're love letters to the real couriers who once turned geography into destiny. Fairy tales, too, are littered with the wreckage of undelivered letters. Remember the poisoned apple in Snow White? It arrives by courier, a seemingly innocent gift masking deadly intent. Or the tragic scroll in Romeo and Juliet, lost because a quarantined messenger couldn't reach Mantua in time. These stories whisper a truth medieval societies knew too well. A message delayed was often a fate sealed. Even nursery rhymes like Ride a Cock-Horse to Banbury Cross hide echoes of royal couriers, their bells and ribbons disguising the urgency of their missions. Ballads took the opposite tack, spinning couriers into heroes. The Scottish ballad of Sir Patrick Spens turns a doomed messenger into a symbol of loyalty, racing stormy seas with a king's summons clutched in frozen hands. In Spain, the romance Del Mensajero celebrates a rider who outruns an entire army, his horse's hooves striking sparks like flint against the night. These weren't just entertainments, they were oral monuments to the anonymous riders who'd earned no statues but lived on in verse. Modern adaptations can't resist adding twists. The Witcher's Doppler couriers, shape-shifting to evade capture, riff on medieval fears of impersonators. Assassin's Creed games let players relive the adrenaline of rooftop chases and coded dispatches. Even Harry Potter's owl's feathery, persistent, and fiercely territorial channel the spirit of Mongol postal hawks. What binds these fictional couriers to their historical counterparts isn't just the danger they face, but the faith others place in them. A broken seal or a missed deadline isn't just a narrative beat. It's a heartbeat skipped, a kingdom held in breathless suspense. The tropes run deeper than we realize. That classic message delivered with dying breath, seen. It mirrors actual accounts from the Crusades, where knights dictated final words to squires turned makeshift couriers. The disguised messenger trope, think Arya Stark, hiding in plain sight, echoes real spies like the Burgundian envoy, who posed as a leper to slip through enemy lines. Even the trope of the intercepted love letter traces back to Tudor England, where Queen Elizabeth's courtiers bribed messengers to sniff out romantic rivalries. What's telling is how rarely these stories focus on the message itself. The power lies in the carrying, the grit of the journey, the near misses, the sheer stubbornness of human connection. That's why couriers endure in fiction. They embody the fragile, furious will to bridge distances, whether across kingdoms or between hearts. Every time a fictional rider crests a hill, parchment clutched tight, they're not just advancing a plot. They're resurrecting the ghosts of 1,000 real riders who once galloped through history's storms, turning solitude into a lifeline. Archaeological digs across Europe keep unearthing fragments of this lost communication web, each artifact whispering secrets about how medieval couriers operated. In the foothills of the Pyrenees, excavators recently uncovered a 13th century way station with horse bones still bearing the distinctive wear patterns of relay racing. Their teeth ground down from constant bit champing, their leg joints swollen from relentless sprinting between stops. Nearby, a fire pit held fragments of lead containers, likely used to waterproof dispatches during river crossings. These aren't just relics. They're time capsules preserving the grueling rhythm of a courier's life. Then there are the badges, small, unassuming metal discs that tell explosive stories. A 2021 dig in Tuscany revealed a silver messenger's badge stamped with the Visconti Viper, its reverse side scratched with notches. Historians now believe these were tally marks, each groove representing a completed high-risk mission. Similar finds in England show guild messengers wore lead tokens around their necks, their surfaces rubbed smooth from being shown at checkpoints. The most poignant, a child-sized courier badge found near Burgos, Spain, proof some messengers started their perilous careers before adolescence. Letters themselves occasionally survive against all odds. In a Welsh castle's latrine shaft where humidity and lack of oxygen created accidental preservation, archaeologists found a 15th century love note wrapped in oiled cloth. Its ink had bled, but multispectral imaging revealed heartbreaking details. A noblewoman's plea to her lover, carried by a servant girl posing as a laundress. Nearby lay the remains of a wax seal, not broken but neatly sliced with a knife, suggesting the messenger herself had been bribed to reveal the contents. The Moors Albarana towers tell another kind of story. These slender watchtowers dotting southern Spain weren't just defensive structures, they formed an optical telegraph system centuries before the French invented theirs. Excavations show their upper chambers held polished bronze mirrors for daylight signaling and braziers for nighttime smoke codes. A 2019 study proved their placements weren't random. Each tower stood precisely where it could relay messages across valleys without intermediate steps, creating straight-line information highways visible from the next tower's vantage. Wax seals emerge as the ultimate forensic tool. Modern spectrometry has detected crushed gemstones, flower pollen, even human saliva mixed into medieval sealing wax, each ingredient a trademark confirming authenticity. Some kings went further. Richard the Lionheart's Chancery added strands of his famously red hair to important seals, while Byzantine emperors embedded threads dyed with Tyrian purple, a color so exclusive its possession by unauthorized persons was treason. Perhaps the most haunting finds are the ones that never reached their destinations. A shipwreck off Cyprus yielded a lead case containing a papal bull from 1327, its seal intact but its parchment blank, likely a victim of seawater seepage. In the Alps, a 19th century hiker stumbled upon a frozen courier still clutching his dispatch, the ink washed away by centuries of meltwater. These silent witnesses remind us that for every message that changed history, countless others vanished into the abyss, their importance forever unknown. What's thrilling is how technology keeps unlocking new clues. LiDAR scans recently revealed buried post roads in Hungary that don't appear on any surviving maps, while AI analysis of monastic ledgers has identified patterns suggesting secret routes through nominally hostile territories. Each discovery chips away at the myth that the medieval world was disconnected, revealing instead a landscape humming with invisible connections, where a folded parchment in the right hands could alter the fate of nations, and the people who carried them were the unsung engineers of empire. Medieval scholars grappled with the morality of intercepted messages like theologians dissecting scripture. Was it a sin to read another lord's mail, or just smart strategy? The debate split along unexpected lines. Church authorities often compared message theft to eavesdropping, citing St. Augustine's warning that secrets were the property of their owners. Yet even pious rulers like Charlemagne employed teams of codebreakers, justifying it as reading the devil's handiwork when intercepting pagan missives. The contradiction reveals a deeper tension. In an age when information could topple kingdoms, was espionage a dirty trick or divine providence? Consider the case of a 12th century Cistercian monk torn between vows and duty. Tasked with carrying a bishop's letter endorsing a noble's rebellion, he discovered the bishop had been coerced. Instead of delivering the message, he burned it and fabricated a replacement praising the king, an act of deception that likely saved thousands from civil war. When confronted, he argued that his higher loyalty was to peace, not parchment. Such dilemmas forced messengers to weigh oaths against outcomes, proving that medieval ethics were anything but black and white. Secular rulers had their own twisted logic. The Venetians maintained a dedicated office for intercepting merchant correspondence, claiming it protected trade from foreign manipulation. Their agents even developed a brutal protocol. Any courier caught with unopened letters was released unharmed, while those carrying decoded intercepts had their right hands severed, a grim reminder that knowledge was power, but only if controlled. Meanwhile, Islamic jurists under the Abbasid Caliphate ruled that wartime espionage was permissible if it prevented bloodshed, drawing parallels to medical dissections meant to heal rather than harm. The most fascinating wrinkle, some couriers turned interception into performance art. A Burgundian messenger, suspecting his pouch had been tampered with, would seal letters with threads dipped in special ink. If the thread color changed upon delivery, he'd know the wax had been reheated. Others wrote fake decoy messages full of outrageous lies like claims of dragon sightings to discredit spies who took the bait. These weren't just tricks, they were moral statements, proving that even in the shadows of espionage, cleverness could outmaneuver cruelty. What's striking is how these ancient debates mirror modern dilemmas. When a medieval pope debated whether to read a rival cardinal's letters, he faced the same quandary as today's governments wrestling with encrypted communications. The difference: our tools have grown sophisticated, but the core question remains: does survival ever justify stripping the sanctity from words? The messengers of old, with their wax seals and whispered confessions, would likely chuckle at our naivety. They knew truth and treachery were always two sides of the same coin. While European couriers navigated dense forests and fortified castles high in the Andes, the Inca Empire built something extraordinary: a human telegraph system powered by the fittest runners the world had ever seen. The chasqui weren't just messengers, they were Olympic-level athletes trained from childhood to sprint across mountain passes at altitudes that would leave most travelers gasping for air. Stations called tambos dotted the Inca road network. Every 6 miles, the maximum distance a runner could cover at full speed before passing his message to a fresh teammate. But here's what's mind-blowing. A dispatch could travel from Quito to Cusco, over 1,200 miles of rugged terrain, in just 5 days. That's faster than a modern hiker with top-tier gear could manage today. These runners didn't just carry words, they memorized intricate quipu, knotted cords encoding everything from tax records to imperial decrees, proving that sometimes the most advanced technology is the human mind itself. Half a world away, the Islamic Barid system turned communication into both art and weapon. Established under the Umayyad Caliphate in the 7th century, this wasn't just a postal service, it was the medieval equivalent of combining the CIA with FedEx. Barid couriers rode swift Arabian horses along routes lined with way stations stocked with fresh mounts and carrier pigeons. But their real power lay in their dual role as intelligence gatherers. Every rider doubled as the caliph's eyes and ears, noting rebel activity, crop yields, even local gossip. Their reports shaped everything from tax policies to military campaigns, with the most urgent messages marked by attaching a feather, the original priority mail. The system was so efficient that Harun al-Rashid could enjoy fresh cherries from Lebanon delivered to Baghdad in just 48 hours, a logistical feat that would make modern food delivery apps blush. China's imperial couriers faced a different challenge: protecting precious Silk Road dispatches from bandits and rival warlords. Their solution: turn each messenger into a miniature fortress. Tang Dynasty couriers traveled with armed escorts, their documents sealed inside lacquered boxes that were themselves works of art, some inlaid with mother-of-pearl scenes of mythical beasts to denote urgency. The real innovation, though, was their relay system's sheer scale. By the Yuan dynasty, over 10,000 postal stations crisscrossed China, each staffed with translators to handle the empire's multilingual correspondence. Marco Polo marveled at their efficiency, noting how a courier could cross the empire in weeks by ringing bells at each station to summon fresh horses before he'd even dismounted. What binds these systems together isn't just their speed, it's how they mirror the societies that built them. The Inca's relay runners reflected a culture that prized collective effort over individual glory, where no single chasqui claimed fame for delivering a message. The Barid spy messengers embodied the Islamic Golden Age's fusion of scholarship and statecraft, where knowledge was power in its purest form, and China's armored couriers. They were rolling symbols of imperial might, their very presence reminding frontier towns of the emperor's long reach. Yet for all their differences, these networks shared a universal truth: civilizations rise and fall by their ability to move information. Whether it's a quipu not racing over mountain peaks, a pigeon darting across desert skies, or a galloping horse kicking up Silk Road dust, the story remains the same. Control the message, and you control history itself, a lesson as true today in the age of fiber optics as it was when runners first laced up their sandals and pressed onward into the unknown. The life of a medieval courier wasn't just physically grueling. It wore on the mind in ways we're only beginning to understand. Imagine riding through a moonless night, every shadow potentially hiding an ambush, while the weight of a kingdom's secrets presses against your ribs. Small wonder these messengers clung to rituals and charms for solace. Excavations of old way stations revealed tiny amulets sewn into saddlebags, splinters of saints' bones, dried herbs in linen pouches, even scorpion tails preserved in wax. One 13th century courier's diary discovered in Avignon describes how he refused to travel on Fridays, convinced his patron saint turned her back on him that day after a near-fatal encounter with bandits. Others carried witch bottles, tiny clay vessels filled with nail clippings and urine, believing they'd reflect curses back to enemies. The mental strain of memorization left its own marks. Byzantine courier training manuals warn of message dreams, where trainees would wake screaming fragments of dispatches they'd practiced weeks earlier. Some developed compulsive habits, like the French royal messenger who reportedly whispered his cargo to his horse every mile to keep the words from slipping away. The Vatican archives contain a haunting confession from a papal courier who broke down during Easter Mass, sobbing out a secret excommunication order he'd delivered years prior. The words had burned so deeply into his mind he couldn't shake them loose. Isolation magnified these wounds. Unlike soldiers who shared the horrors of battle, couriers often processed trauma alone. A German guild ledger from 1412 records a rider's pension being revoked after he was found, howling at crossroads like a moon-touched wolf, likely what we'd now recognize as PTSD. Without debriefings or camaraderie, many turned to dangerous coping mechanisms. Tax records from English taverns along messenger routes show consistent overcharging for ale and opium, suggesting self-medication was rampant. The cruelest irony, the very skills that made them exceptional hypervigilance, perfect recall became traps. Venetian spy masters noted how veteran couriers would flinch at the sound of scribes' quills, their nerves frayed by years of listening for the scratch of unauthorized pens copying their dispatches. Some couldn't enter churches without counting exits, while others developed rituals like the Spanish messenger who insisted on burning his gloves after each mission, as if flames could cleanse more than just germs. What's heartbreaking is how these struggles went unacknowledged in their time. Chronicles celebrated couriers who arrived bloodied but triumphant, never those who sat hollow-eyed in quiet rooms afterward. Yet their ghosts linger in odd places in the folk songs of alpine shepherds about the silent riders, in the Polish superstition that finding a messenger's lost button brings bad luck, even in the English phrase, "gone postal," which eerily echoes centuries of suppressed stress. These weren't just delivermen, they were human vessels stretched to breaking by the weight of others' words, their silent sacrifices written not in ink but in the quiet tremors of hands that never quite stopped reaching for phantom saddlebags in the dark. In an age before red carpets and handshake summits, the fate of nations often rested on the shoulders of a single travel-worn courier dismounting in a foreign courtyard. These men weren't just letter carriers, they were the original diplomats, their every gesture scrutinized for hidden meaning. When a Byzantine messenger knelt to present a scroll, the angle of his bow could signal respect or veiled contempt. A French envoy's choice to wear his sword into an English hall might escalate tensions before he'd even spoken. The chronicles of the 100 Years' War brim with such moments, like the time a Burgundian herald's decision to present his credentials left-handed nearly derailed a truce, his hosts interpreting it as a deliberate insult rather than an old jousting injury. What set the great courier diplomats apart was their ability to improvise. Unlike modern ambassadors who consult lengthy briefing books, these messengers often had to think on their feet. Take the case of Pietro da Monte, a papal nuncio in 15th century Germany. When local lords demanded immediate revisions to a Vatican decree, he didn't wait months for instructions. He bartered on the spot, trading minor wording changes for their public endorsement. Such flexibility wasn't just clever, it was survival. The Venetian archives preserved dozens of blank clause letters where sensitive terms were left incomplete, trusting the courier to fill them based on the recipient's mood. Language itself became a battlefield. Smart messengers mastered the art of soft delivery, framing even the harshest ultimatums in terms that wouldn't provoke immediate backlash. A surviving training manual from the Hanseatic League instructs couriers to preface demands with phrases like, "My lord regrets the necessity of," or "with greatest reluctance I must convey." A verbal shock absorbers that gave rulers room to save face. Some went further. Ottoman messengers delivering declarations of war were trained to quote Quranic verses about the temporary nature of conflict, subtly implying reconciliation might follow. The most skilled blurred the line between messenger and negotiator. During the War of the Roses, a Lancastrian courier named Edmund Hatton famously averted a massacre by promising Yorkist defenders their lives would be spared if they surrendered. A pledge he had no authority to make, but that ultimately proved correct. His gamble established a precedent still referenced in modern military codes about parley. Similarly, when Mongol envoys negotiated with Russian princes, they weren't just relaying demands, they were sizing up defenses, gauging morale, and sometimes adjusting terms on the spot based on what their sharp eyes observed. This improvisational diplomacy birthed protocols we still use today. The modern diplomatic pouch traces back to medieval messengers' sealed satchels, while the concept of diplomatic immunity grew from the sacred status granted to heralds. Even summit seating arrangements echo old courier rituals, the careful positioning of envoys to avoid implying dominance. Perhaps their greatest legacy was proving that communication isn't just about transmitting words, but about reading rooms, managing egos, and knowing when to bend the rules for greater peace. These riders didn't just carry history, they shaped it, one tactful pause and carefully chosen phrase at a time. Crossing war-torn landscapes with only a satchel and a sword, medieval couriers faced a challenge modern travelers never consider: where to find their next meal without poisoning themselves or losing precious time. While we might grab a protein bar at a gas station, these riders had to master the delicate art of eating on the move without ending up doubled over in a ditch. Monasteries became their lifelines, offering travelers bread, a rock-hard loaf baked with extra salt and barley that could last a month without molding. One surviving example from a Swiss abbey crumbles like sandstone today, yet records show it saved countless messengers from starvation when winter storms blocked mountain passes. But bread alone couldn't fuel a rider covering 50 miles a day. Dried meat, usually salted beef or mutton, was the medieval equivalent of energy bars, though chewing it required jaws strong enough to crack walnuts. Cheese, wax-sealed to prevent spoilage, provided fat and protein, while ale served a dual purpose: hydration and a crude form of water purification. The smartest couriers carried pocket soups, leather pouches filled with dehydrated broth flakes that could be reconstituted with hot water at way stations. A French royal account from 1382 lists these soups as standard issue for messengers, alongside a curious notation about 4 prunes per week, likely to combat the constipation caused by all that protein. Water posed the deadliest gamble. Clear streams might hide dysentery, while village wells could be poisoned by besieging armies. Couriers learned to doctor questionable water with vinegar or wine, not just for flavor but to kill microbes centuries before germ theory existed. Some went further. Byzantine riders reportedly dropped silver coins into their waterskins, unknowingly leveraging the metal's antibacterial properties. Others relied on local wisdom, like the Scandinavian trick of filtering water through moss or the Moorish practice of storing it in porous clay jars that cooled and purified simultaneously. The real test came in hostile territories where stopping to hunt or forage risked capture. Here, couriers turned scavengers, nibbling on edible lichen, roasting field mice trapped in grain sacks, or in dire straits chewing pine resin to suppress hunger. A grim but common entry in messenger guild logs was "found with acorns in pouch," a euphemism for riders so desperate they'd resorted to eating bitter, barely digestible nuts. Yet even these struggles birthed innovations. That same acorn meal, when leached of tannins and ground into flour, became a wartime staple across Europe, proving necessity didn't just mother invention, it fed empires. What's astonishing isn't that these meals were meager, but that they worked. A Mongol courier could cross the steppe on nothing but dried mare's milk and strips of biltong, while a Venetian spy might sustain himself for days on almond paste and hardtack. These weren't just meals, they were calculated survival strategies, every bite weighed against speed and safety. The next time you complain about airport food, remember, at least no one's expecting you to outride an ambush after eating it. History remembers the couriers who succeeded, but the ones who failed, whether by chance, betrayal, or sheer bad luck, often left deeper marks on the world. Take that fateful autumn of 1066, when a single exhausted rider slumped in his saddle, his horse stumbling toward the English coast too late to matter. King Harold's scouts had already marched north to repel a Viking invasion, leaving southern England undefended just as William the Conqueror's fleet landed at Pevensey. Had that courier arrived even a day earlier, Harold might have consolidated his forces, altering the Battle of Hastings, and perhaps sparing the Anglo-Saxon kingdom from Norman rule. Instead, his delay became one of history's great what-ifs, proving that in the calculus of war, timing wasn't just everything, it was the only thing. Decades later, a different kind of failure unfolded in the sun-baked hills of Tuscany. Two rival city-states, Siena and Florence, had been locked in a blood feud over trade routes when a truce letter vanished somewhere along the Via Francigena. The Florentine courier sworn to deliver it was found weeks later in a ravine, his skull crushed by a rockslide, the parchment still tucked in his tunic. By then, fresh battles had erupted, fueled by assumptions of bad faith. The conflict dragged on for 3 more years, consuming lives and gold that might have been spared had that letter reached its destination. Archivists later discovered the doomed courier had taken a shortcut through unstable hills, a gamble that cost not just his life but prolonged a war. Yet these catastrophes weren't entirely in vain. Each failure forced systems to adapt. After Hastings, English kings instituted a rule of triple redundancy. Critical messages went out with 3 riders on diverging routes. Venetian merchants, burned by lost contracts, began embedding duplicate copies in wax-sealed lead tubes, waited to sink if a ship found it recoverable by divers if the vessel's location was known. Even the humble wax seal evolved, with nobles pressing their signet rings into clay as well as wax, creating hardened backups that could survive fire or water. The most poignant lesson came from the Mongols, who treated courier failures with chilling pragmatism. When a message failed to arrive during Genghis Khan's Western campaign, the suspected culprit wasn't just the missing rider, it was every station master along his route. All were executed, a brutal but effective incentive for vigilance. Yet even the Khan's iron-fisted system had an unexpected softness. His law mandated that the families of couriers who died en route received lifelong support, recognizing that loyalty flowed both ways. These stumbles did more than highlight fragility. They revealed the hidden threads holding societies together. A single undelivered letter could unravel alliances, bankrupt merchants, or doom armies, but each disaster also wove new strands of resilience into the system. The irony, today's digital networks, for all their speed, still grapple with the same core vulnerabilities medieval couriers faced: trust, timing, and the relentless truth that information is only as strong as the hands that carry it. The parchment might now be pixels, but the stakes and the shadows of those who failed remain. The battlefield may have changed from muddy siege camps to satellite-monitored deserts, but the ghost of medieval couriers lingers in every modern military's communication playbook. Those same principles that kept a king's dispatches safe from prying eyes in the 12th century now govern how special forces transmit coordinates or diplomats encrypt their cables. Consider the modern dispatch rider, a soldier on a motorcycle racing through contested territory with a secure satchel. Swap the engine for hoofbeats, the Kevlar for chainmail, and you've essentially recreated a Byzantine imperial messenger dodging arrows in Anatolia. Even the insignia remain eerily similar, where medieval riders carried silver greyhound badges to signal their protected status. Today's military couriers wear distinct armbands marking them as non-combatants under international law. Encryption, too, owes its roots to those wax-sealed scrolls and cipher wheels. The NSA's complex algorithms may seem galaxies apart from a monk's Tyanean notes, but both solve the same problem: how to make words meaningless to everyone except the intended recipient. Medieval messengers would instantly recognize the logic behind modern, burst transmission technology, where messages are compressed and sent in milliseconds to avoid interception. It's just a high-tech version of their trick of memorizing dispatches and burning the originals. Even the concept of need-to-know security clearances traces back to feudal lords who deliberately fragmented battle plans among multiple couriers, ensuring no single rider could betray the full strategy if captured. Special Forces training drills drive the connection home. When a Navy SEAL practices evading pursuit by moving only at night or disguising footprints, he's employing the same tradecraft as a 15th century Burgundian courier smearing mud on his cloak to blend into tree bark. Urban warfare units still study how medieval messengers used cathedral crypts and sewer tunnels as escape routes, lessons first documented in the siege diaries of Constantinople. The British SAS even includes a grueling exercise where recruits must navigate hostile terrain with nothing but a medieval-style cipher wheel and the stars for guidance, proving that sometimes the old ways are the most reliable when technology fails. Perhaps the most telling legacy is in the unspoken rules. Modern military radios use authentication codes that change daily, mirroring how papal couriers swapped cipher keys at each monastery. The duress code, a covert signal indicating a messenger is acting under threat, was perfected by Mongol riders who would adjust their horse's bridle in specific ways if captured. Even the practice of destroying sensitive documents before capture isn't some Cold War innovation. It echoes Venetian spies who ate their dispatches rather than let them fall into Ottoman hands. The through line is undeniable. Whether it's a drone strike coordinates or a medieval call to arms, the stakes of failed communication never change. What's remarkable isn't how much has evolved, but how much endures. That lone rider galloping through the night with a kingdom's fate in his satchel, he's still out there. Just now, his horse is a Humvee, his wax seal is an RSA key, and his enemies aren't feudal archers but hackers in distant server farms. The weapons grow sharper, the tools more sophisticated, but the game remains the same. Control the message, and you control the war. Reenacting the journeys of medieval couriers isn't just a hobby, it's a time machine powered by blisters, saddle sores, and sheer stubbornness. Across Europe and beyond, historical enthusiasts are strapping on hand-stitched leather boots, loading replica saddlebags with parchment scrolls, and hitting ancient post roads to experience firsthand what it took to move information before the age of instant communication. In the Czech Republic, a group calling themselves the Greyhound Guild recently completed a 2-week trek along the old Habsburg messenger route from Prague to Vienna, navigating solely by 13th century maps and the position of the sun. Their most startling discovery, a long-forgotten cobblestone path hidden under modern farmland, a road that doesn't appear on any surviving records but matches where patterns on centuries-old horseshoes found in local museums. These experiments aren't just about nostalgia, they're rewriting history books. When British historian Gareth Evans attempted to retrace a Welsh rebel's escape route using only period-accurate gear, he proved a disputed medieval chronicle correct. The journey could indeed be made in 3 days, but only by fording rivers at specific moonlight hours when tides exposed hidden gravel banks. Other reenactors have uncovered practical details no archive could capture, like how wool cloaks soaked in lanolin shed rain better than modern waterproof fabrics, or why couriers preferred apples over bread as riding snacks. The fruit's natural sugars provided sustained energy without the thirst triggered by salty provisions. The physical toll of these journey shocks even seasoned athletes. A French team recreating a papal messenger's sprint from Avignon to Lyon found their modern muscles faltering after just 60 miles of medieval roads, less than half the distance historical records claim professional couriers covered daily. Their secret, archaeologists now suspect medieval riders conditioned their bodies with bone broth and fermented dairy, creating gut microbiomes optimized for endurance. Some reenactors have adopted these ancient diets with startling results, reporting less inflammation and faster recovery times than with modern sports nutrition. Beyond the physical challenges, these projects reveal the hidden genius of medieval logistics. A German group discovered that certain blind valleys long considered impassable actually functioned as natural amplifiers at dawn, allowing riders to communicate across miles via horn blast. In Spain, a horseback team proved Moorish messengers could have used star patterns visible only from specific mountain passes as navigation aids, explaining how they maintained such uncanny accuracy without compasses. Each finding peels back another layer of the past, transforming romanticized legends into tangible, mud-spattered reality. For those tempted to try a scaled-down version, local heritage groups offer beginner-friendly courier days along preserved medieval trails. Imagine spending an afternoon carrying a wax-sealed letter between reconstructed way stations, learning to read cloud formations for storm warnings, or practicing the lost art of estimating distance by horse's breath. The intervals between rests marked not by miles, but by how long a mount could sustain a canter before foaming. Just leave your phone behind. The real magic happens when you're forced to rely solely on the methods that kept kingdoms connected for centuries. Who knows, you might stumble upon a crumbled milestone or a tree carved with 800-year-old route markers, becoming part of the story you set out to study. After all, history isn't just something we read. It's something we step into, one dusty bootprint at a time. The medieval couriers who braved war zones were more than just message bearers, they were the nervous system of civilizations. Their courage, cunning, and sacrifice enabled empires to rise, treaties to be signed, and knowledge to survive dark ages. Next time you send a text in seconds, remember those who risked everything to deliver a single sentence. If you found this journey into hidden history fascinating, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video and let's give these unsung heroes the recognition they deserve. Who knows, maybe there's a bit of courier spirit in all of us. Think about it. Every time you hit send on an email or tap out a quick message, you're tapping into a legacy that stretches back over 1,000 years. Those medieval riders didn't just deliver letters, they built the blueprint for how we connect, even today. The urgency of a wartime dispatch lives on in your push notifications. The secrecy of a wax-sealed scroll echoes in your encrypted chats, and that relentless drive to bridge distances, no matter the cost. It's the same force that now powers satellites and fiber optic cables. But here's what's truly remarkable. While our tools have evolved beyond recognition, the human element hasn't. The couriers of old didn't just rely on horses and hollowed-out staffs, they relied on wit, adaptability, and an unshakable commitment to their mission. Sound familiar? It's the same spirit that drives modern journalists racing into conflict zones, or disaster responders carving paths through rubble. The technology changes, but the heart of the work remains. Someone has to carry the message, whatever the risk. So the next time you complain about a delayed delivery or a spotty Wi-Fi signal, take a moment to picture a rain-soaked rider squinting through a storm, his only compass a memorized list of landmarks. Or a monk whispering a coded psalm as he presses a forbidden text into the hands of a trusted traveler. Or a merchant's daughter stitching rebel plans into the hem of her dress, knowing discovery means death. Their stories aren't just history, they're a mirror, reflecting back the incredible privilege we enjoy today. And if this glimpse into their world has left you as awestruck as it has me, don't let the conversation end here. Share this video with someone who loves uncovering history's hidden threads. Drop a comment about which courier's story resonated most. Was it the Mongol riders conquering continents with their relay stations, or the Venetian spies turning trade routes into an intelligence network? Or maybe it's the quiet heroism of those nameless messengers whose bones still lie buried along forgotten roads, their deeds known only to the dirt that cradles them. Because here's the truth, history isn't just about kings and battles. It's about the people who moved the words that moved the world. And in an age where information flies faster than ever, we owe it to those who paved the way, one perilous mile at a time, to remember how fragile, how precious that connection really is. So keep sharing, keep exploring, and who knows, maybe somewhere out there, a future historian will uncover our own messages, marveling at how we carried the torch forward. After all, the story never really ends, it just finds new